is one of history's most notorious monsters, known as the man who tried to kill the baby Jesus in the slaughter of the innocents. A ruthless tyrant who makes a career out of executing his rivals for the throne, his wife, his sons, his mother-in-law, and many more. But behind the monster is a man who keeps Rome at bay, a Middle Eastern strongman who imposes his will on the desert sands of Judea, not just with a vortex of terror, but with magnificent buildings. A bad guy who creates one of the greatest monuments ever built, the Temple in Jerusalem. This is the story of the secrets of Herod's reign. Judea, in the decades before the birth of Christ, is a land of warring tribes. Herod is born into a murderous region. Weakness means death. Between civil wars within and the Roman Empire without, he must walk a precarious line. Herod is a battle-seasoned soldier and perfect marksman when he enters his capital, Jerusalem, as newly crowned king of Judea. His first task, eliminate his enemies, for they are anti-Rome. True power in his religious state rests with a council of 71 priests. He orders his soldiers to kill 45 of them.
The Jewish people knew that they now had a ruler who meant business. Nothing was going to stand in his way. Don't mess with Herod.
And yet, he's a man of vision so daring, he builds entire cities, fortresses, magnificent monuments.
No one else has made such an impact on the Holy Land as we see it today.
But one of his finest achievements, the sacred temple of the Jews, each of its walls nearly 1,000 feet long and more, is a place he can never enter. For Herod, king of the Jews, is only half Jewish, which means he can't be a priest, and only priests can enter the temple precinct.
The slander against him was that he was not fully Jewish. This haunted him throughout his career.
The secrets of Herod's reign begin in Judea, where Herod grew up, a world where the Hasmoneans are the true royal family. His ancestors are from a tribe to the south, the Idumeans, pagans, Arabs. Skilled builders, surviving in this arid desert by digging underground.
You can wander from room to room, cave connecting to another cave. Literally an underground city of monumental proportions.
The Idumeans are a conquered people. The Jews invaded their land several generations before and forced Herod's ancestors to convert to Judaism. The Judean royal family, the Hasmoneans, think they are born to rule. They are 100% Jewish. They'll never let Herod forget he's not one of them. What's more, he's a collaborator with the hated superpower, Rome. Herod's father is a Roman citizen, friend of Julius Caesar.
There's no doubt that Herod, at the earliest age that he could begin to comprehend what was going on in the world, recognized that the real power were the Romans. And this was the power that he would have to curry favor with.
Rome is the world's most powerful nation. Judea lies at the eastern edge of its empire, a critical trading hub and a buffer against Rome's greatest rival in the east, the Parthian Empire. Olive oil, dates, wine, all pass through Judea. Judea remains an independent kingdom, but only because Rome allows it to be so. What Rome wants is a stable frontier. Judea is full of warring peoples. With endless civil wars, Herod seizes his chance. He's brutally single-minded.
Herod was a very ambitious young man, completely fascinated by wealth and power and absolutely determined to achieve the highest position he could.
By the age of 25, Herod is governor of Galilee. By 30, he's charmed his way into the Hasmonean royal family.
Herod found himself in a world that he was perfectly suited for. This highly driven, highly skilled outsider who saw that the world of the changing Roman Republic and the changing world of the Hasmonean dynasty meant that there was a place for him.
But Rome's great enemy, the Parthians, impede Herod's effortless rise to power. In 40 BC, Parthian armies invade from the east. Full-scale civil war erupts. Herod flees with his family to the desert rock of Masada, a fortress south of Jerusalem. Here, they may seem protected by cliffs that plunge 1,400 feet down to the Dead Sea. But Herod knows he'll never win if the Parthians attack.
Herod realized that if he stayed there, he was finished. He had to recoup the situation, and he had to do that by bringing a superior power down on his side.
Herod makes a dangerous winter voyage across the Mediterranean to the heart of the empire. With him, he takes his passport to power, a 16-year-old boy. His name is Aristobulus, heir to the Hasmonean throne. Herod has a simple plan. Ask the Romans to install the boy as king. Then he can be the power behind the throne. The plan depends on one man, the kingmaker who holds the key to Judea, the legendary Roman general Mark Antony. Mark Antony was just a boy when he first met Herod's father. Mark Antony knows he's dealing with a family that understands Rome. Herod turns on the charm. Antony and Herod see eye to eye. Judea is a thorn in Rome's side. Unrest in this unruly province must be quashed. Mark Antony has no time for Herod's plan. He wants Herod, not Aristobulus, to be king, and right away. Judea needs a new kind of ruler, a cold-blooded, ruthless politician, a strong man who can force his will on warring peoples.
Rome was built on the pursuit of power, and that is what Mark Antony recognized in Herod, someone who also was driven in the pursuit of power exactly like himself.
Herod left home a defeated man. He returns to Judea a king, king of the Jews. He's 36. With 2 of Rome's fabled legions, he returns to Galilee and starts to fight his way south to Jerusalem. It takes 2 long years to win Judea back. Now that he has Rome's total backing, he must turn his title into real power and hang on to it. Herod's reign of terror is underway. First, Judea's Supreme Court succumbs. Then the old Hasmonean king. And to truly solidify his power, the ultimate fortress bearing his name. When Herod, king of the Jews, anointed by Rome. His Roman patron Mark Antony has pushed aside the heir to the throne of Judea.
When Herod returns from Rome, his first task is to solidify his power base by removing any opposition to his rule. And he does this with extreme brutality.
Herod's first victims, the Sanhedrin, Judea's Supreme Court. 71 legal and religious leaders, revered as sages. They meet daily and are the final authority on Jewish law. They will be a challenge to Herod's power. Herod wipes out 45 of them, a huge blow to the Jewish leadership.
He himself could not become a priest and therefore could not become a part of that power base. If he couldn't become a part of it, he had to eliminate it.
Next, Herod has the old Hasmonean king strangled. one less royal competitor. Yet his grip on power isn't yet absolute. He has the rest of the royal family to contend with. He knows brutality isn't the only way. There's a tactic as old as there have been dynasties: marriage. He takes the beautiful Princess Miriam as his bride. By marrying into the old dynasty, Herod hopes to gain legitimacy in the eyes of his subjects. But he's inviting the enemy into his house. He has to contend with his mother-in-law, Alexandra, and the heir to the throne the Romans pushed aside, Miriam's brother, Aristobulus. Yet the Hasmoneans will also profit from this union. Herod is Rome's man in Judea.
It was a political match par excellence. The Hasmoneans probably thought that they would have some kind of an insurance policy which would make their positions secure.
But Herod's plans for Judea transcend politics. He'll impose his reign on Judea for all to see. With a vision so grandiose, his people will be awestruck. This vision took root when he was a boy. He's seen how man can play God with nature. To survive, deep beneath the hillside in Idumea, his ancestors dug networks of caverns, passages, and reservoirs.
And there's no doubt that Herod being in such a place certainly left an impression on him, seeing what people could do with nature. And that's certainly one of the most important features of everything that Herod builds. He never lets nature stand in his way. His imagination seems to be the limit.
But Herod's dreams aren't underground. They reach for the skies. A statement of power, of daring, of vision. He wants to replicate the splendor of imperial Rome with palaces, temples, amphitheaters. And his desire to control nature will prove so strong, he'll literally move mountains. Herod creates a palace like no other, a fortress to keep watch over his unruly subjects, and a tomb for his remains set on top of a mountain.
The scale here is monumental. The mountain itself behind us is an artificial mountain. It was artificially created by Herod, and it's huge. It's about 64 meters in diameter. A meter is about a yard, so that's an enormous mountain to make from scratch, to build out of nothing.
Thousands of slaves moved thousands of tons of earth to build his monument. Constructed 8 miles to the south of Jerusalem, he names it Herodium. At its centerpiece, Herod builds a fortress to awe his enemies and a palace to awe his subjects. From the very top, Herod has a spectacular view of the Judean hills and can easily communicate by signal mirror or fire with the city of Jerusalem.
Nobody had ever built anything like this before. Something like this would have been absolutely overwhelming. It would have been almost as if it was from another planet. 2,000
years ago, this was an oasis with huge artificial gardens surrounded by a thriving metropolis. Slaves carved 200 stone steps into the hillside. An aqueduct brought water from a spring near Bethlehem 3 miles away. And slaves carried the water up the 200 steps from the cisterns below the citadel.
Herod used architecture not just to glorify himself, but also to intimidate his enemies, to show how immensely strong, solid, and permanent he was.
From here, he can look out over his kingdom. But while he's dreaming magnificent dreams of leaving a permanent legacy to Judea, he must watch his back. His power is being eroded by the very family he's married into. His mother-in-law, Alexandra, wants her family to rule, not Herod. The next chapter in this deadly duel will now be decided in Jericho, and these pools will be center stage.
There is no doubt in my mind that the Hasmoneans would have disliked Herod intensely and that if they could have got rid of him and regained power for themselves, they would have done so.
Miriam plays the dutiful wife, while her mother Alexandra schemes. Herod must decipher friend from foe. His rival is a charismatic young prince. Miriam's brother may have lost out as king, but in this deeply religious kingdom, another role rivals the throne: high priest. Miriam sees her chance. She hates Herod as much as Herod is in love with her. She'll call on the help of a man Herod is utterly indebted to, Mark Antony. She sends him portraits of herself and Aristobulus. Her brother is very handsome. She's sure Mark Antony will succumb to his charm. Herod's terrified. Mark Antony does indeed succumb, and Alexandra gets her way. Herod realizes he's been outmaneuvered by the legitimate heir to the throne. Never mind, high priest. Might Aristobulus now make a play for Herod's crown?
Herod always harbors a suspicion that the Romans might, in the end, prefer a Hasmonean to him because of the traditional legitimacy of the Hasmoneans.
Herod realizes there'll be riots if he banishes Aristobulus, so he appoints him high priest. Pilgrims flock to Jerusalem for the Feast of the Tabernacles. Aristobulus appears before the crowds dressed in rich and glittering robes.
There was an outpouring of love and support for Aristobulus. Herod must have been terrified by what he saw. He must have felt that this groundswell of support, this uninhibited show of public affection for Aristobulus, would undermine his own rule and authority as king. He must have begun thinking, what can I do to get rid of him?
While the Hasmoneans celebrate, Herod plots his counterattack. He can brook no rival. Herod will wreak his murderous revenge on the royal family. In a desperate attempt to cling to his power, Herod attacks his rivals, swears allegiance to a new master, and builds a majestic desert oasis. Secrets of Herod's reign. Herod is facing a huge threat. A more legitimate rival to his throne. The 17-year-old high priest, his brother-in-law, Aristobulus. To the Jewish people, he is a rallying cry.
Herod was almost psychotic when it came to the Hasmoneans. He always felt threatened by them. And he realized that in a popular conception, the only legitimate kings were Hasmoneans.
The Hasmoneans believe they have a divine right to rule. They see power within their grasp, yet the family celebrations are premature. Herod invites Aristobulus to his winter palace in Jericho, whispers words of charm, plies him with drink, encourages him into the water to cool off. Then has him drowned. It's made to look like a tragic accident. First, the removal of the Jewish Supreme Court. Then, the old Hasmonean king. And now his brother-in-law. Herod is a monster who'll do anything to cling to power.
Herod's rise to power is the classic method of all dictators. You marry the boss's daughter, and if you think someone might be a rival, even if you're not certain, you still get rid of them. You are absolutely ruthless.
31 BC. Though Herod has eliminated this latest threat, another looms hundreds of miles away. Rome is being torn apart by its own civil war. The ruler in the east, Mark Antony, Herod's patron, is locked in a power struggle to gain complete control of the empire, east and west. Herod's fate is tied to Mark Antony's. When Herod learns Mark Antony has been defeated by Octavian at the Battle of Actium, he realizes he's backed a loser. Octavian, Rome's new emperor, summons Herod. Herod must answer for his devotion to the defeated Antony. Herod's a pathologically jealous man with a very beautiful wife. Before he leaves, he gives a friend some instructions.
He went, realizing that he probably had no choice. He didn't know whether he was going to be put to death or suffer some other penalty like exile to some God-forsaken place.
Herod removes his crown as a sign of deference and takes a big gamble. He just tells the truth. Herod admits his past loyalty to Mark Antony, but shows no sign of remorse.
Herod took a very unusual and bold strategy. Instead of throwing himself at Octavian's feet, saying, "I was wrong, I made a mistake," he took a different rhetorical strategy. And what he was saying to Octavian was essentially, "I support Rome. Whoever Rome has set up here as a ruler, I'm behind him."
Like his father before him, Herod knows he's nothing without Rome. Ever the wily operator, he swears allegiance to his new master, the Emperor Octavian. Herod's political instincts save his life.
Not only does he come back with his head on his shoulders, but he comes back reconfirmed as king of the Jewish people.
His authority secure, Herod tightens his grip on his kingdom. His secret police spread out across the country. At night, Herod goes out in disguise to find out what people think of him. He creates a terrifying climate of fear with his national security state. Dissidents just disappear inside his prisons and fortresses. For the last few years, he's been building the gigantic fortress at Masada. Although it's in the middle of the Judean desert, he wants a palace there too, an oasis.
You're in the middle of the desert. You're on a rock that's hundreds of meters up, and you discover a swimming pool. You discover a bath. You discover a kind of opulent use of water, which is contrary to everything that you expect.
Tens of thousands of slaves and Jewish forced laborers turn his dream into reality. What's more, to the side of the cliff clings a spectacular three-tier hanging palace.
Of all the various fortresses that had been built, this was clearly the most impregnable, the most dominating, the one that was had the most natural advantages.
And yet Herod still feels the need to top this 1,400-foot cliff face with a defensive wall 1 mile long. Here, he can furtively scan the lands of Judea and imagine threats, betrayals, rebellious subjects, treacherous relatives. He may be safe here from the outside world, but his inner demons never leave him. Herod's murderous spree continues.
Herod started doing things that had no real rhyme or reason, and that were simply the product of a mind that was no longer in full control of itself.
We now return to secrets of Herod's reign. Herod returns from pledging his allegiance to Rome's new emperor, Octavian. But he has some unfinished business. The instruction to his friend that if he fails to return, his wife Miriam should be killed. So jealous is he of her, still so passionately and helplessly in love with her, if he can't have her, neither can another man. But he returns, and Miriam discovers his instructions.
Him you there?
Herod's sister Salome now enters the fray. For a year, she spins a web of deceit, whispers insinuations in his ear. His mother-in-law is plotting against him. His wife is brewing love potions, poisons. The friend charged with guarding his wife has betrayed him. Miriam speaks the unspeakable.
Him you there?
She calls Herod
Him you there?
half Jew.
It would have been very, very insulting. And because Herod very well knew he hadn't come out of an aristocratic family, the insult would have been even greater.
Him you there?
Herod unleashes his murderous temper and has his friend executed. Then he turns his fury on Miriam, convinced she's guilty of adultery. In his rage, he has her executed too. She's not yet 25.
What pushed him over the edge was the fact that she was Hasmonean. He loved her and he was afraid of her at the same time. The murder of Miriam was different from all of Herod's acts of violence. This is again also part of Herod's passion. He often reacted with violence and then in the end regretted.
Herod refuses to believe his wife is dead. He speaks to her as if she's still alive. Miriam's fate in death has passed into legend. According to the Talmud, the Jewish scriptures written 500 years after Herod, he kept Miriam's body preserved for 7 years in honey. Now Herod turns his suspicions on his mother-in-law. He executes her too.
Herod started doing things that had no real rhyme or reason, and that were simply the product of a mind that was no longer in full control of itself.
In the dark night of his reign of terror, he also executes his sister's husband. Then 10 assassins. He demands a loyalty oath. He sees treachery everywhere. And yet, he pulls himself and his country together. Ever mindful of who his masters are, Herod determines to send his emperor in Rome, Octavian, an unmistakable sign of his allegiance. On the desolate and windy coast of the Mediterranean, he builds a colossal tribute in marble, concrete, and stone. This is the city of Caesarea, a salute to the emperor himself.
The more Herod can create a kingdom which mirrors the Roman Empire, the more he will create an impression in Rome that this is a loyal state. He's a loyal king. You have nothing to fear from me. I want to be like you.
Herod starts to build a city in the image of Rome, a pagan city, an un-Jewish city, and at its heart, one of the largest harbors in the Mediterranean.
It would have been the first thing that mariners from the West saw when they arrived. This would have given them an initial impression of Judea as a prosperous, Romanized, civilized place, not some backward province on the edge of the world.
Herod builds a temple dedicated to his master Octavian, but he doesn't stop there. Herod embraces all the trappings of a Western civilization.
Caesarea was designed and intended as the Roman, non-Jewish capital, in which any Jewish visitors would have felt that they were in a foreign country.
Herod builds an amphitheater where gladiators fight to the death. Blood sports are decidedly un-Jewish. Herod designs his city to entertain in truly Roman fashion. His giant stadium houses the greatest spectacle of all, chariot racing.
Over here, this would be where Herod sat, on top of a large podium. And the reason why his box was placed here was chariot racing was a very aggressive sport.
The Hippodrome is host to the Grand Prix of its day.
The horses would race around this very elongated arena. When they came to the corners, which by the way were painted red, because the Romans believed that red scared the horses. One of the main points of having a chariot race was not just the race, but the crash. You'd often have chariots overturning, riders trampled, horses and riders smashing into the wall. That was all part of the spectacle. And of course, Herod, sitting over here, would have the best seats in the house. Everyone's attention would be focused on this corner. So he would be here watching everything and being watched by everyone.
With the building of Caesarea, Herod gives his people a city to match the superpower Rome. His city, his port are a magnet for trade. Judea is now a major player in the Roman world. Herod has built a huge new city from scratch within 10 years. A daring and grandiose scheme, yet it's also the product of a deranged mind. Beneath the madness, the monstrous behavior, the murders, the spies, lurks the twisted sanity of a Middle Eastern strongman, desperate to cling to power, but also to hold his nation together.
Herod was the ultimate pragmatist. He had to merge the two absolutely opposed worlds and get them to work alongside one another without conflict.
Judea is a Jewish state, yet Herod feels he'll never be accepted by the Jews. He'll make one final throw of the dice. Sensing time is running out, Herod turns to his capital, Jerusalem. Here, he vows to build the greatest monument ever in the name of the Jewish God, the most magnificent temple in antiquity. But will it be enough to make the Jews love him and to save his crown? Paranoid, homicidal, irrational, Herod turns his attention to his sons, then to the infant Jesus, the infamous massacre of the innocents. But did it really happen? Find out. Herod now plans the most ambitious and daring building he's ever attempted. Jerusalem is the heart of the Jewish faith, the polar opposite of the Roman pagan world, of Caesarea with its theaters, amphitheaters, chariot racing, gladiators. He'll restore his reputation with a wondrous temple for the Jews.
For the Jewish people, the temple was the center of the whole of their religion. It was the most sacred place on the face of the earth.
The biblical King Solomon built the first great Jewish temple. Destroyed in 586 BC by Nebuchadnezzar, it was replaced by a pale imitation. With his temple, Herod can prove himself the heir to Solomon and the true King of the Jews. The challenge is monumental. Herod changes the fabric of the landscape. He slices off the top of a mountain to create a blank canvas. Here, he'll erect a platform the size of 24 football fields. The soft white stone that will be used is the stone used for Solomon's temple. Taken from Solomon's quarries a few hundred yards to the north, cut and shaped before it reaches the Temple Mount, so the sacred site won't be disturbed by the noise. It's still possible to see where Herod's men cut the mount away. 10,000 men surround the platform with giant walls, each measuring nearly 1,000 feet long and more. The Talmud says that when the temple was built, it only rained at night, so that the men could work uninterrupted during the day. The scale of Herod's ambition can be seen in one of the giant foundation stones. More than 40 feet long, 11 feet high, and 14 feet wide. It weighs 600 tons. Some of the walls still exist. Orthodox Jews still pray by the western wall of Herod's creation, the Wailing Wall. And at the center of the complex, Herod builds its crowning glory, the inner temple. It's a declaration to his masters in Rome and to the Jewish people of Herod's greatness. Since laymen can't enter the inner precinct, 1,000 priests are trained to be stonemasons and carpenters. Visitors of the time describe a wondrous holy building sheathed in white marble that gleams in the morning sun like a snowy mountain. Herod wants to overlay it with gold, but the rabbis tell him, leave it alone, for it's more beautiful as it is. It looks like waves on the sea. But access to the inner temple is the sole privilege of priests. The builder of the greatest temple in antiquity cannot set foot inside it. So Herod builds a viewing platform.
What Herod does is to trump the notion of him not being allowed in the temple. Okay, you can have your temple, but here's my basilica. I'm looking down on you. I'm king of the Jews.
Herod's platform is now the site of the Muslim mosque, now known as the Dome of the Rock. And this fragment still remains. Herod has completed the greatest temple in antiquity in honor of the Jewish God. His life has been one long quest to overcome his unroyal origins and to gain acceptance. Herod's temple is meant to be a glorious epitaph. Herod is 63 when the temple is dedicated in 10 BC, but his demons never leave him. He's ruled for nearly 30 years. Time to make plans for his succession. He's made will after will. No one knows how many children he had, maybe 12, maybe more. His poisonous sister Salome strikes again.
One of the great fears of dictators is who is getting together, who is talking in secret, what sort of possible plot is being hatched against me.
She convinces him his 2 sons by Miriam are plotting his murder, seeking revenge for the death of their mother. Herod has them strangled and extinguishes the last of the male line of the Hasmonean kings. But can there be a physical explanation for Herod's homicidal rage, his irrational behavior, his paranoia?
We now know very well that physical illnesses and mental illnesses go together. It must have been creeping on and creeping on and creeping on.
By 4 BC in Jerusalem, there are the stirrings of revolt, street demonstrations. Herod has built the greatest temple ever to the Jewish God, and yet still he offends his Jewish subjects. They say that he still remembers his masters in Rome. He's adorned the temple doors with the symbol of Rome, a golden eagle. Pagan. This is sacrilege.
Herod had to have known that putting an eagle on the temple gates would have provoked immediate and deep resentment and opposition.
Rumors are now circulating that Herod's dying. Students tear down this symbol of Roman oppression and hack it to pieces with axes. A raging Herod rises from his sickbed to confront the leaders of the uprising. In his mind, he's done more for the Jews than any other king since Solomon. He berates them for being ungrateful. He reminds them that the Hasmoneans had 125 years to honor God, and they didn't. He, Herod, did, with a magnificent temple. As always, retribution is swift. The perpetrators are led away, and the ringleaders are burned alive. Herod's end is near. According to the Gospel of St. Matthew, it's around this time that Herod ordered his most notorious atrocity, his attempt to kill the infant Jesus, a challenger to his title, King of the Jews. Herod orders all male children 2 and under in the Bethlehem area to be murdered. It's known as the Massacre of the Innocents.
The story of the Massacre of the Innocents only appears in Matthew's Gospel. There is not a shred of evidence from any other source, historical or archaeological, that this event took place at all.
So how did this story enter history?
Herod was the perfect king for this story. First of all, he was a king who was capable of impulsive violence, of brutal violence, and of violence on a fairly large scale. He had proven that throughout his career.
Without doubt, Herod's hands are soaked with blood. His reign has been murderous, yet there's no evidence of this particular atrocity. Herod is now 69. His body is riddled with disease. A remarkably detailed account of the final days of Herod's illness still remains. It's written by the historian Josephus. He reveals that Herod is suffering from convulsions, acute stomach pain, severe itching, swelling of the limbs, and worst of all, his body is producing worms.
Worms were regarded as a punishment from God, and certainly the sources talk about the whole illness, the last illness of Herod, being due to his wickedness and punishment for his misdeeds.
Recent medical analysis of the historical evidence sheds new light on the cause of his symptoms.
The main symptoms are severe, persistent itching, shortness of breath, and swelling. That can be caused by heart failure and by kidney failure, and is often a combination of both.
But what's the explanation for the worms?
His last days were spent in the humid, hot area of Jericho, where flies would have laid eggs on his swollen and infected body, and those would have emerged as maggots.
Herod is in agony. He knows his days are numbered. He also knows that at best, his passing will be greeted with indifference. In his delirium, he orders all the kingdom's prominent men to be executed on the day of his death.
He sees this as a perfectly reasonable way of ensuring that he is mourned.
There'll be no mourning on the day he dies. No one is executed. Herod leaves Judea stained with blood, but enriched with splendor. From the coastal city of Caesarea with its theaters and games, to the mountain of Herodium with its palace and pools, to the jewel in the crown, the Temple of Jerusalem. For 3 decades, Herod walks a political tightrope between the Jews and Romans. A brutal strongman, he forces unity on warring tribes. A great visionary, he creates a thriving nation out of the desert sands, but all in vain. In 73 AD, the Jews make a famous last stand against the Romans at the fortress of Masada. By 135 AD, the Romans have destroyed Jerusalem. Herod, charmer and torturer, monster and visionary. Yet we remember him for an atrocity for which there's no evidence. The massacre of the innocents. With his death, Herod's name becomes a byword for terror and insanity. His triumphs become secrets, overshadowed by the brutality and the horror of his reign.